In today's video, I want to talk about the teen mental health crisis. What is it, and what are the complex factors that are contributing to it? You may or may not have noticed that over the last decade, there has been a significant increase in mental health struggles amongst adolescents. Maybe you've noticed in your own lives, maybe you've read online that there's this like teen mental health crisis that's happening. I want to talk a little bit about the numbers behind that, the statistics. What are we noticing as far as diagnoses, and what are the differences between the last decade? So let's take a look at that. According to the National Institute of Health, nearly 1 in 3 adolescents aged 13 and 18 will experience an anxiety disorder, with rates increasing by 20% between 2007 and 2012. Also, the prevalence of major depressive episodes amongst adolescents has risen. The increase from 8.3% in 2011 to 13.3% in 2017. In 2022, 6.7 million US adolescents had one or more behavioral health conditions diagnosed. The total number of them with those conditions skyrocketed from 2011 to 2021. And this is from a report from the United Hospital Fund. Let's talk about the most prevalent mental health disorders that are diagnosed currently amongst adolescents. So we have anxiety disorders affecting around 32% of adolescents. We have depressive disorders that are affecting approximately 13.3% of adolescents. We have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, diagnosed in about 9.8% of adolescents, and then behavioral disorders diagnosed in about 9.6% of adolescents. And that's not including, we have OCD, we have eating disorders, and other things that are also affecting our adolescents. Another important note is suicide rates. The suicide rate for adolescents has increased dramatically. The National Institute of Mental Health reports that suicide is the second leading cause of death among individuals aged 10 to 24. That rate increased by 56% from 2007 to 2017. In 2021, more than 1 in 5, so 22% of students seriously considered attempting suicide, and 1 in 10, which is 10%, actually attempted suicide. We also know that this affects certain members of society more disproportionately than others. Nearly half, so 45% of LGBTQ plus students in 2021 seriously considered attempting suicide, far more than heterosexual students. Also, Black students were more likely to attempt suicide than students of any other races or ethnicities. This is also combined with an increase in hospital visits that we're seeing. So, emergency room visits for self harm have risen sharply. A study in the Journal of Pediatrics found that from 2007 to 2015, the number of ER visits for self harm among adolescents aged 10 to 14 more than doubled. I know that was a lot of numbers and statistics I just threw at you, but essentially, what that means and what we're seeing is a steady increase over the past decade in mental health struggles with teens. So it's been on a steady incline, and we haven't really seen that much fluctuation. So there's got to be something contributing to that. And you've probably seen a lot of things on social media or read things in the news or people coming out with books around, specific things pointing towards like social media or parenting or COVID directly impacting teen mental health, but it's much more complex than that. So I really want to take a deep dive into what the potential contributing factors could be and how they kind of all intermix to create this teen mental health crisis. So let's talk about the first contributing factor, and probably the one you hear the most being attributed for our teen mental health, which is social media or technology use. Of course, naturally, there has been an increase in technology use over the last decade since the resurgence of smartphones and having this technology at our hands. That has changed essentially the way that teens interact with their peers, interact with technology in general. So, of course, I think it's going to have an impact on their mental health. I think it's a little bit overused as kind of just pointing at social media always as the issue and not looking at more complex factors, right? Or the teen as a whole. But there are definitely ways that social media impacts our kids, and ways that I've seen in the adolescents that I treat on a daily basis. So, we have Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and all these things that allow access, to so many different platforms and pages, and it leaves a lot of room for comparison and a lot of room for cyberbullying, a lot of room for interacting with inappropriate people in general, right? They have so much access at their fingertips. So, of course, I think that is going to impact their mental health. It has changed the way that they engage with each other socially, right? So, there's a lot of teens now that really solely engage socially through these apps and don't have a lot of face to face time with their friends, or they communicate socially through gaming or Discord or things like that, and they don't really have a lot of face to face time with their friends. I don't think it's all bad because they are making those social connections. And for some of the teens that I see, these friends they have on Discord, these friends they have on Snapchat are really important to them. They're very important social connections. However, we do have to take into effect that there aren't as many one-to-one interpersonal interactions. And I think the biggest thing that I see that affects his mental health is the comparison piece, right? Seeing how people display themselves on social media and just having so many people to compare themselves to and think that they're not doing as well, or they're not as successful, or they're not looking as good, right? All of those things that we know to be harmful. Also, I think it disturbs their sleep, right? Like thinking about the nuances when it comes to technology use. A lot of kids are using these technology like way into the night, right? They don't have a lot of limitations around it. They're staying up and it's affecting their sleep patterns, which of course is going to have an impact on their mental health. I think something though that is overlooked is how parents are involved in this social media issue, right? A lot of parents are quick to just blame social media. Oh, it's TikTok. Oh, it's Instagram, right? That's messing up my kid. But what about your use of technology? What about your use of social media? How are you modeling technology use? There's like this age of digital parenting that exists now, right? Where parents are just as much on their phones as their kids are. So think about that. How are you modeling this use to your kid? Are you having less face to face time with them? Is there less family time? I know that you've probably been at a restaurant or two and seen an entire family just sitting and scrolling on their phones during dinner, right? How has this affected the family dynamic in general? We can't just pin the blame on adolescents, right? We're definitely using our phones quite a bit as well. And also, are you managing your kids' time on their screens, right? What are your limits? What are your boundaries around it? Are you having consistent limits with them and conversations on how to use social media safely and how to be um, balance life and social media, like real life and social media? Are you having those conversations with your kids? I think all of those things are encompassed in this issue of social media and need to be taken into consideration. Another contributing factor that I've seen personally impact adolescent mental health is academic pressure. The demands and requirements that it takes to be successful or get into college or anything like that has increased so much over the years. I've seen it personally in the decade that I've been working with teens, just the amount of pressure they're putting on themselves from an earlier and earlier and earlier age. It's starting sooner and sooner. So, whereas before, maybe I saw kids thinking about AP courses and things like that, and what they wanted to do in college, maybe starting in sophomore year, but definitely junior, definitely senior. Now, all the way in middle school, kids are worried about what AP courses they're going to take and what scores that they're going to get and how they're going to manage getting into the school that they want, because the demands for school has increased as well. And I think schools themselves trying to prepare kids for this academic success end up putting pressure on them. Parents might be putting a lot of pressure on their kids as well because they know it's competitive and they end up inadvertently just putting so much on their kids. And I've kind of seen this go both two ways, right? There's that kid that really cares, that really wants to do well, that people pleasing kid who is like perfectionistic and really wants to get into these high level schools, who is like killing themselves over these grades, right? They really like that perfectionism really starts taking over. And it's like all or nothing. I'm either getting all A's, doing the best I can, or I am failing. And that has such a tremendous impact on their mental health. It's sad. I've seen it happen to a lot of my clients where that rigidity really impacts their self esteem, how they feel about themselves, and everything is riding on academic success, and they can't really see a life past that. Then there's the kiddos where it's so demanding, it's so taxing, and it's actually really hard for them to keep up with. They just kind of like throw in the towel. And it's not because they don't care, but they make it seem like they don't care because it's just too hard. It's too much to keep up with. And that fear of disappointment, that fear of failure just causes them to like be paralyzed and avoid things, in general. And then their academic performance obviously struggles, and then that makes them feel worse about themselves in turn as well. So all of these things have a huge impact on our kids' mental health and the way that parents manage the academic pressure as well. Are you an ally with your kid? Are you helping them work through these things? Are you seeing them for more than just their academic successes, right? Are you seeing them for as a whole, as a kid outside of these things? Or are you also adding to that pressure and wanting them to succeed, whether it be good intentioned or not, it's having a damaging effect. Another contributing factor is socioeconomic status or social political issues that have been happening over the last decade. We've certainly seen an increase in economic struggles in the past decade, in families in general, right? Which has a direct impact on our kids. We know that kids that come from lower socioeconomic status families have a higher tendency to struggle from anxiety and depression. There's different pressures placed on them. They struggle with fears around the future and the security of their future, and when COVID and the pandemic hit, that really took a toll on a lot of these families that were already maybe in socioeconomic stress, experiencing job losses, right? And just a lot of financial stressors that can have a huge impact on the family dynamic, which is going to have a huge impact on our teens. Not to mention during the pandemic and COVID, the struggle for teens around school and the social interactions, right? Being quarantined, doing online school, not having the regular social interactions that they usually have, albeit some of them are not the best, but it's still a part of their day to day. They were just so disrupted, so taken off course. They didn't have the consistency and the structure that they're used to. And that really had a huge toll on anxiety and depression and self harm and suicidality, all of those things. As a therapist who was working during the pandemic, the surge that I saw in those issues was pretty intense. And then also, there's a lot of issues that our kids are worried about. So, whether you have whatever political stance you have on these things, like climate change, like school shootings, whatever you believe in it, doesn't really matter. Our kids are worried about it. And that's something I hear from my adolescents all the time. It's just this kind of fear for the future and the world around them. They have a lot of access to things now with technology, seeing a lot of news and seeing a lot of things spread around social media. So they know what's going on in the world, and they're frightened, right? There's a lot of my adolescents that I see that are worried about the future of the world, and that takes a big toll on them mentally. Some of them feel hopeless and helpless around the future, and like, is it worth trying to be successful if our world is crumbling and falling apart, right? So these are things to take into consideration. This fear of the world has also translated to parenting. I want to point out there's a lot of parents that just deem the world as generally more unsafe and therefore have been more overprotective of their kids. And that can, it makes sense, but it can have some impact negatively on them and their mental health. They're just restricted in terms of freedom. They can't do things that, let's say, teens 20 years ago were doing, being out with their friends, unmonitored, right? Just living their life. That's not the case anymore. And so some of the impact on that freedom and tightening up on that could have an impact on their mental health, and parents just being overprotective in general. Right, really being kind of like helicopter parents, that has an impact on a teen's ability to build their own resiliency and distress tolerance skills because their parents are the ones that are hovering and try to make sure that everything is okay. So all of these things have had an impact not just on adults, but it trickles down into our teens as well. Final contributing factor, and probably a big one, is that we have greater awareness around mental health struggles. There is been a little bit of a lessening of stigma around mental health issues and being diagnosed with mental health issues. Parents, providers, schools, they're all becoming a little bit more aware, a little bit more keen on picking up on the signs of mental health diagnosis, which is great. Even teens themselves are reaching out and asking for help more and more. It's becoming more common and less stigmatized around their friend groups as well. And this is, I think, a big contributing factor into an increase in the diagnosis. We're just talking about it more, so we're therefore seeing it more. Unfortunately, although we're seeing more of it, there is still not enough care to manage the teen mental health crisis. So there's still a shortage in behavioral health experts and people that can help and tend to these needs. So parents being a proactive part of this is going to be crucial to managing the teen mental health crisis. As you can see, this teen mental health crisis is a complex and nuanced issue that has a lot of contributing factors probably playing a part in it, and probably some that I didn't even mention today. But I think most experts would agree that it's a combination of a lot of these things converging together. The biggest takeaway I want you to get from this is not to minimize your teen struggles or issues. Being a teen is already a really difficult stage. They are feeling big emotions, they're experiencing a lot of things, but they don't have the capacity or the brain development to manage it like we do, like adults do. So then you add all of these other confounding factors that we talked about today, and imagine the impact that that has on them. They're experiencing so much and yet don't really fully know how to deal with it. And so they need you. They need their support system. They need their parents to help guide them through this and not minimize or judge their experiences. I hope that this video was helpful in helping kind of dive into what this teen mental health crisis is. If you're interested in learning more about other topics, please feel free to leave a comment below and subscribe and follow for more parenting tips and videos in the future. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.